Forbes. Thank you all very much for getting out this early this morning, and thank you particularly to all of the elected officials for your service to to this city, to the state, and to the country. And I also appreciate you electing Scott Ridgell to the House of Representatives. Scott is a great guy, and I have enjoyed so much serving. And one of the things that I also always like to do is thank all of you for the great work that you have done to continue time after time after time to push this fight that we have for our country. And it is its fight every day. One of the things that I see as I travel across the country, the question that I'm getting from almost every single person I meet, and I would dare say that most people in this room have asked this question to themselves if they haven't verbalized it somewhere else, and it's this. It's whether or not the future of America is optimistic or is it pessimistic. And how many of us would have ever thought 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that the greatest nation in the world would find most of its citizens asking whether or not our future is optimistic or pessimistic. And when I travel around the world, I can tell you that other countries around the world are asking the exact same question. And over again, I kind of look at the debates from time to time. I'm not being critical, it's just all we see are talking points and kind of boilerplate stuff, and we're not really looking at something. Part of it is because of the way the debates are set up. You don't have the time to really get into those issues. And so one of the things that I wanted to do today is not give you some prepared spiel or speech or talking points, but just talk to you about some observations. And then if we have time and you're willing to give me your comments or your questions. And let me begin with a trip that I just had to Israel. I spent a week there because, as you know, the UN has just come out and said what we all knew prior to that, and that is that Iran now has everything that they need to make a nuclear bomb. And as chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, it was important to me to make sure that the Israelis were in a position with Iron Dome to be able to deal with some of those missile attacks that they needed to. So the Prime Minister was very gracious. He has to okay you personally to go inspect Iron Dome, which he did to me. We went out on just a few miles from the Gaza Strip and looked at that. And there's two takeaways that I'd like to share with you this morning from that. The first one is that we are so caught up in all the stuff we're dealing with now with the economics and the budget systems and those kind of things that we're facing and our job situation, that we don't realize that the world is moving at just a frantic speed towards a very, very dangerous and insecure situation. And we still think about Iraq and Afghanistan, but some of the big areas that are popping up are no longer Afghanistan and Iraq, but rather we're looking at China and where they're going and the changes that they've had in just the last 9 months. The Pakistanis and what's happening there, which could very well be the most dangerous country in the world right now. And then the Iranians, which, as you know, it's not a battle between them and the Israelis. The Israelis just happen to be in their way for what they want, which is a huge superpower in all of the Middle East. And they are working frantically to get that, and they're doing things with cost and position strategies of putting groups in South America, Latin America, Mexico, so that it will keep us focused on some of the activities that are there. And the Israelis are prepared to do what they need to do to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But for the first time ever, in fact, I just saw again where Panetta has come out and said, you know, for them not to use military effort against Iran. The president has told them not to do that. The Israelis are very clear. They don't need the U.S. partnership to do it. All they need is a green light, and they'll take care of it, making sure that the Iranians don't get nuclear weapons. Because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it is a game changer for everything that we know in world security today. And they are moving at a very, very rapid pace to try to do that. The second thing, though, I want to share with you as a takeaway is this. I'm sorry.
Where does the green light have to come from the United States? Or?
Let me tell you in just a second. Is that okay? I'll tell you. I'll give you that insight. The second thing, though, that you take away after you spend a lot of time with their defense people, their scientists, and the Prime Minister is this. I went over there wanting to help them, but actually they helped me a lot, because sometimes you wake up every day and all we get is bad news. I mean, you get bad news on the TV, bad news in your newspapers, talk to your neighbor, you get bad news. I sometimes will just tell my staff, just give me some good news, even if you have to lie to me today. Give me something, you know, to tell me some good news. But they have had an ability for eons of time to live with a forecast over their head of just catastrophic predictions of what's going to happen to them. And every single time, through their intellect and their brain power and their heart, they are able to figure out a way to survive it. And what I brought back is with us, and you and I were talking about this just a minute ago. As Americans, the thing that scares me more than all of our fiscal problems and all the national security issues we have is that we can't go quietly into the night. We can't just say, you know, there's nothing we can do to change all this. I think as Americans, this is a time when we've got to step up to the plate and we've got to say, our brains, our heart, we can come to the table, and despite all the dire forecasts that are up there, we're going to work our way out of these problems, and we are not going to let the greatest nation the world has ever known become the most mediocre nation that the world has known. I want to come back to that in a minute, but let me move you to something that's going to impact all of us, and it's going to impact all of us very, very soon. You all know the super committee, whatever this concept was. You know, I didn't think it was a very good concept. I voted against it. And the major reason I did was not any fiscal situation, but it was what it was going to do to the defense of the country. And that's what I told the Speaker, and that's what I told the Armed Services Committee, and I felt like a voice crying in the wilderness. But I'm not a voice crying in the wilderness anymore, because as of yesterday, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee grabbed me and he said, Randy, Super Committee is not going to reach an agreement. The Speaker had just told him that. What that will do to defense is like nothing anyone in this room has ever imagined that will happen. We have already had $465 billion of cuts that have already been made to defense. This will add another $600 billion of cuts to the national defense of the country. And I can tell you right now, there's no one in the Pentagon that can even fathom thinking about how to deal with $600 billion more of cuts. And look, some of you in here have served in great fashion. I don't want to step on your turf, but let me just tell you the situation we are from a strategic point of view. If we take our Navy now, alone, before we get to these cuts, just at $465 billion cuts where we are right now, a lot of people don't realize, but for the first time in most of our lifetime, the Chinese have more ships in their Navy than we have in our Navy. Now, we sit back and say, well, our capabilities are greater. That's true. But sometimes numbers start equaling capability. And the second thing is their curve is going up like this. Our curve is going down like this. Second thing is, a lot of people don't realize for the last decade we've done nothing to increase our surface-to-surface missile capability. So, if you line up a Navy ship from the United States Navy and a Chinese ship, they could hit us with a missile 185 kilometers. We have to be within 120 kilometers to hit them. In 9 years, they will outnumber us in subs in the Pacific 78 to 32 in terms of subs. 1 out of 5 of our ships now are not passing inspection fully because we're not doing the ship repair and maintenance that we need. That's just the Navy. The Marine Corps will tell you, General Dunford personally testified and told me this. If these cuts go through, the Marine Corps will go down to 145,000 to 150,000 men. Now, they're just numbers to most of us. But here's the key ingredient. We could not win one contingency anywhere in the world. And that's not my words. That's General Dunford, Vice Chief of the Marine Corps, who will tell you that we couldn't win one contingency. That means we used to have a strategy that would say we could win 2 wars at one time. Then you remember we went to win one and hold one. The Marine Corps will tell you we can't meet the combatant commander's needs for one contingency if we go there, which means China goes into Taiwan, we can't win it. If North Korea goes South Korea, we can't win it. And if Israel's invaded, we can't stop it. Now, they're situations that are game changers because in the last 9 months, the Chinese pilots have become more emboldened than they've ever been before in getting at our pilots and what they're doing. The Chinese are starting to make more and more claims in the South China Sea and what they're trying to do for oil, because a vacuum begins to invite attacks and invite our enemies to move further and further to where we are. The Iranians think we're absolutely bluffing on everything we do, and that's why they're moving on as fast as they can to develop these nuclear weapons. And they're now bold enough to try to come in our territory and try to deal with us. Chinese, just within the last few months, have issued orders to our military that we have to get their permission to go within 200 miles of their coast. We don't make anybody get permission to come within 200 miles of our coast. And here's the key. If our military has to do that, then commercial vessels will have to do that. There is $1 trillion of trade every year that goes through that Pacific region, and 90% of the world's economy goes by water. And are we going to really be in a position where we have to ask the Chinese permission before we're going to go through places that we need to go through in the world? Now, let's look at just the economics of this stuff. The economics of it are we will lose 122,000 jobs in Virginia alone. In Virginia alone. We will have as many as 6,000 active duty servicemen that are laid off. And once this starts impacting, some of it becomes irreparable and we can't turn it around. And here's the kicker. The President wants this. Harry Reid wants this. And all the Democrats on the super committee want this. So anybody who thought when this was set up that somehow or the other there were incentives for the Democrats to say we don't want this to happen, they're all now voting and saying that's exactly what we want, and they're not going to do anything to pull these triggers off. We are going to have to fight to see how we can mitigate some of the situations that we're dealing with the national defense. Now, let me step back though and just give you one more thing, and then I want to get to your questions. Over and over again, I hear people say, well, what's the answer? What can we do? Is there any things that we can do? Well, let me just tell you what I think we should do. And none of the candidates have asked me, but if I were President of the United States tomorrow, and I was sworn in tomorrow, here's the first thing I would do. First thing that I would do is I would say to the rest of the world, we are not going to have a weakened defense, because the Chinese defense minister said something very, very smart. In December of last year, he said for China to be great, they've got to have a strong economy and a strong defense. You can't have one without the other. First thing I tell the American people is, you know, two pillars that we've got: a strong economy, a strong military. You start unraveling one, you're unraveling the other. I want to let the world know we're going to continue to have the strongest military the world's ever known. We're going to pay the price tag to get it. But here's what else I would tell them. I'd say to China, I'd say to Iran, I'd say to anybody who wants to listen, we may not be in every struggle, but we're going to be every place around the world, and they're going to see us every place, because here's what I want them to do. Every single day when the admiral from the fleet that's opposing me looks out his window, I want him to say, it's not going to happen today. Might happen tomorrow, but it's not going to happen today. And that's a message we need to send to the world. We used to do that. We pulled back and we stopped doing it. Second thing is, I think we ought to look and we ought to announce that we're going to change the way that we build things in the United States. You know, we talk about all the money we need for road projects and infrastructure projects, but what we don't realize is it's not just the funding, but it's the bureaucracy that's killing all of that. We looked at that Minnesota bridge that collapsed a few years ago. You guys remember, that bridge was rebuilt in 414 days. So we studied how they did it. And how they did it was pretty simple. We wrote a plan called the 414 plan that says this. What would happen if we said for the next 5 years we're going to build every infrastructure project and road project in America in 414 days or less? And here's the way you do it. You take every regulation that doesn't apply to safety or durability and you put it on the shelf for the next 5 years. That's what we did in Minnesota. You would build more roads. Now, I want you to just imagine this America. I voted against, as you guys know, it's only 17 of us who voted against every single bailout bill or stimulus package that went through, because none of them would work. But if we'd have taken that $800 billion stimulus package, and we had, instead of throwing that away, which most of that money went down the tube, if we had put that along with the 414 plan into roads and infrastructure projects in America, we would have remapped America. It would look totally different than it looks today, and it would lay the groundwork for us to compete with the rest of the world for 50 years down the road. But we didn't do that. But the third thing I'd do is this. I'd scrap the health care bill that we just passed, but the next thing that I would do is implement right away something that some of you might not agree with. But I'd spend $25 billion, and everybody says, why are you going to spend $25 billion? Here's where I'd send it. I'd send it to the National Institute of Health, and I'd tell them laser in on just 3 illnesses: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and diabetes. And I'd say, with that money, I want you to move the curve. And every researcher tells me, for that amount of money, we would move the curve. You don't have to cure the illnesses. Here's all we have to do. If I could bump the symptoms for one of those 3 illnesses for 2 years, I changed the health care curve like it has never been changed in the United States in terms of cost, because they're the 3 illnesses that are driving the health care curve through the roof. And all 3 of them, we could make a huge dent in if we'd have put that there. Now, we spent $79 billion bailing out automobile manufacturers. Suppose we spent 1/3 of that focused in on that, we'd have changed the health care curve. Next thing that I would make sure that we did is I'd have a new energy plan. And many of you know we wrote one called the New Manhattan Project. It's the only one Fox News, CNN, and the Wall Street Journal all say is the best plan. But here's the way it does. Instead of just doing like the Democrats are doing, which is to say this: we're going to put a few smart people in the room. They're going to tell all of you what you should drive, what your light bulb should look like, and those kind of things, and it never works. Or, quite honestly, our program, which is just do everything. The New Manhattan Project says, what if we started out with a plan that brought the best of the private sector, the best of the government sector, the best of academia together, and said, here's a plan that gets us to energy independence 50% in 10 years, 100% in 20 years. But then we incentivize the private sector to be able to do it by doing this. I hold up a prize. It's $1 billion prize if you reach one of the 7 goals that industries say that we need to reach. Now, the beauty of that is the $1 billion is nothing compared to what we save in energy costs around the country, and we don't have to pay for it until we get it. And all of our studies suggest that the private sector will spend 100 times whatever that prize is in investments to be able to get there. And the final part of that is this: we incentivize young kids to go into math and engineering. In just 3 years, the Chinese will have 300 more engineers. Frank, you know how important that is. Indians will have 100,000 more. You know how many more we'll have in the United States? 0. That doesn't mean we don't get new engineers. It just means that some of the ones will be retiring out, so we stay at an equal number. We can't lose that technology edge that we've got around the world. And let me just tell you the last component that I think is important that we do. When you ask, are we going to have an optimistic future, or you say, are we going to have a pessimistic future? I think that there are 2 big pillars that we have to watch. One of them is the military. You can't have an optimistic future for America if we don't have a strong military. You just can't do it. But the second thing is this, and I get beat up with this all the time. I don't think you can do it if we run from the great history of faith that has built this country and sustained this country for a long, long period of time. And that is under attack. Now look, let me just tell you, I'm not talking about whether you go to church, I'm not talking whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God. I'm talking about the fact that there is a well-orchestrated, well-financed, strategic attack today on faith in general across the country, to the point where you can't even mention the word God from a quote of one of our founding fathers or one of our presidents or a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. It is censored. And we see it time after time, place after place. And in fact, we saw our national motto, "In God We Trust," all over the country. People are afraid that they can't put it on the wall. We saw the chaplain of the House of Representatives in a speech say our national motto was "E pluribus unum," because he was afraid to say it was "In God We Trust." In the National Visitor Center, $621 million of taxpayer money. If you walked into that new visitor center when it opened, ingrained in the wall, it said our national motto, "E pluribus unum." They wouldn't put "In God We Trust" in there. They wouldn't put the Pledge of Allegiance in there because it contained "Under God," and they wouldn't put the Declaration of Independence in there because it said our rights came from a Creator. And then, if you look at the President of the United States, he went halfway around the world, and he told the Muslim population that our national motto was "E pluribus unum." And so we said, enough is enough. We brought up the reaffirmation of the God we trust, but also another huge part of it. We said not only is that our national motto, but we need to be displaying it and putting it back up. And 396 members of Congress voted that not only should we reaffirm that national motto, but we better put it back up on the walls again. Now, this is not a battle. I had 1,000 editorial board writers and bloggers
attacked me, including the President of the United States, who, listen to this, went to the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the bridge dedicated to the guy that first penned our national motto, "In God We Trust," and mocked the national motto of the United States. And I'm just suggesting, this is not about theology, it's not about whether you're religious or you're not, it's about the fact that that is a history of faith that has gotten us through. Whether you look at Abraham Lincoln or Roosevelt or John Kennedy, and you say, are we going to rip that away and get it to a point? I had a friend of mine from Kansas, a member of Congress, came into me and he said, "Randy, my little girl came home the other day and she was having a self-esteem day in school," whatever that is. You school board guys might tell me this. But
Occupy Wall Street?
Yes, simple that's right. But she said she was confused. She didn't know what to tell her teacher was special about her. Her mother looked at her like some of you would have looked at your daughters and said, "You go back, honey, and tell your teacher that God made you and He made you special, and that's what's special." Little girl, first grade, Kansas, step back, member, congressional member's daughter, raises her hand up and said, "Mommy, I can't say God in school." And this guy told me, where have we come in the United States of America when a little kid in Kansas don't even feel they can say God in school? So we have launched now the largest effort in this nation's history to put "In God We Trust" back up on walls everywhere. In school boards and city council places and buildings, and we have conservative groups all across the country launching it, because if we don't take this window, we may get to a point where our children and grandchildren walk in and they'll find that they can't even say that motto anymore. Now, if we do those things, if we are willing to not go quietly into the night, I think we'll do what generations of Americans have done before us. We will find a way out of these problems, and we will make sure this nation continues to be a bulwark for freedom. And remember, it's not just freedom for us. It is freedom for the entire world. I'll close with this. I had an ambassador from a great country that was in my office a few weeks ago. Very good man, very good friend of the United States. He's sitting in there and he was talking about defense cuts and things that his country had done. And after he'd done it, I put my arm on his shoulder and I said, "Mr. Ambassador, if you make a mistake," I said, "what is your backstop?" And he said, "You." And I said, "That's right." I said, "If we make a mistake, there's no backstop in the world, because we are the backstop of freedom for the world. We can't fail. And with your help and God's, we won't fail." Thank you very much.